I'm going to take a little bit of a turn today and apply some of my experiences in doing longitudinal epidemiologic research with tribes and maybe provide a perspective on equity, diversity, inclusion, and things that you may think about as you apply some of these energy grid resilience things to the future. And I'm going to lean on something I heard Miguel say where he talked about give ownership to those groups in helping solve some of those energy insecurity issues. And there's a word for that in health research that we use, and it's community-based participatory research when we're trying to engage and involve communities in those kind of things. So you're going to see that theme come up a couple times here today. I would be remiss in any success that I have in working with tribal communities in the Rocky Mountain West if it wasn't through some of the experiences that I've had with some of the folks that you see on the screen here, the National Children's Study, which has morphed into now the federally funded ECHO study, environmental influences on child health outcomes. And then in my department, we've got research internships and mentoring for Indigenous populations and things like that. And lastly, two specific individuals, Phyllis Nasi is at Huntsman Cancer, and she's been integral into my entree, and really I got to build on her trusting relationship with some tribes. And in the same way, Dr. Lillian Tom Warren, who's recently retired from the university as well. So for a little bit of background, I'm an engineer turned environmental scientist. So my day job is measuring exposures, but I work with a variety of smart individuals on trying to relate those exposures to typically adverse health outcomes. But it's these kind of studies that have introduced me to these native peoples and regional tribes and things like that. And again, one of the themes that we've heard in some of these with some populations is they tend to be under-resourced, underrepresented, and quite frankly, left out. And as we try to engage some of these communities or populations, there's issues with trust, there's cultural differences and things like that. And I've spent more than a dozen years now trying to build relationships with these with several tribes. And again, as I mentioned, I'm indebted to the hard work of others, but I'll just repeat that in working with tribal communities, and to some extent, I've seen the same thing with refugee communities in the Salt Lake area and other type of marginalized communities. You've got to have some time on the ground and build that trust. It's not just something that you think you can engage and things like that. And there's those issues of trust are understandable. Again, specific to the tribes in the West. You know, there's downwinders. We've got downwinder studies from our nuclear weapons testing, which happened largely on a lot of the tribal communities and things like that. And our resource extraction, oil and gas extraction, and things like that, or uranium mining has left a tail of Superfund sites on some of their lands and things like that. For me, these are some of the health outcomes and the environmental risk factors, and I don't want to dwell on those, but again, I just remind you that for tribal populations in our region, there's a disproportionate amount of some of these resource extraction type things that go on. You know, additionally, when power grid systems need transmission lines or trunks or whatever that is, it's sort of that NIMBY, not in my backyard scenario. It's easy to try and place those things oftentimes in and amongst those marginalized communities and things like that. So there's reasons for distrust. The same token, what I would mention is there's a flip side to working with tribes. I've given you a bunch of reasons why it's difficult, and engaging and building trust can be hard. But once you've done that, one of the advantages is you've got a dedicated partner. There's usually one administrative group that you're dealing with that speaks for the tribe. I mean, these are sovereign nations. It's a little weird to think of that from our place here in the University of Utah in Salt Lake County, Utah. But you know, when you get a tribal resolution or agreement, it applies, and that community is in agreement with that, and so it falls in place very quickly. It's not going to different pockets and things like that. So there's some advantages to working with tribes as well. Back to stakeholders and that idea of ownership and community-based participatory research, again, related to my environmental monitoring exposures and potentially had adverse health outcomes. You know, we asked questions, listened, held community events, engaged and built community advisory boards, and questions we heard from those stakeholders and members of the community in those amongst those tribes were, you know, I have asthma, my children has asthma, you know, what's changed? Because we didn't see or hear about this in previous generations, grandparents and great grandparents. We've been here forever. Or is there anything in our environment that could harm the next generation? They're very keen and tied into health. And, you know, are there some of the same questions that we have? Are there things in our soil that could cause cancer? Or, you know, one of the questions we heard was, do how we heat our own homes harm us? You know, and some of the conversations I've heard today when we think about energy use and energy resiliency, lots of these communities that I've gone in aren't heating their homes with natural gas. They're generally not using electricity to heat their homes. They may be using propane if they're fortunate in some of these tribal communities. Oftentimes it's wood burning, which we don't think about anymore. You know, sort of that biomass heating. And beyond that, what is even, you know, when you think about energy insecurity or resilience, I've been in communities where, you know, I just had to go to Discount Tire to get a tire repaired. So you think about when you buy that new tire and you pay that $4 recycling fee to get your tire recycled. I was in a tribal community and there was this massive rundown, dilapidated semi that brought a load of used tires, and the tribal community was using those used tires, hacking them up and burning them in the 55-gallon drums to heat their homes in the wintertime. So, you know, energy resilience and security is on a whole different level for some of our neighbors in the region. So the benefits of this community-based participatory research, that ownership, that stakeholder engagement, those kind of things, it builds on the community's self-identified areas of concern. So when I think about energy resiliency and things like that, you know, engaging them and asking them, is there alternative energy resources, or if that energy resiliency may not be present, are things like solar or wind or alternative energy forms something that they would welcome and engage with? And you know, it helps us to characterize the current status. It helps us as partners in this process with our tribal partners identify potential outcomes. And things like that, and it helps us collectively develop an action plan that is effective, culturally appropriate, and sustainable. And that's an important thing. If and when our tribal partners have engaged with an outside entity, be it a state agency or a federal agency or a university group for research or something like that, oftentimes they feel like you know, one of the things that I've heard is, well, they come in and they engage with us for a time and then they leave, and they didn't leave anything lasting or something like that. And that goes back to that trust type level. And a quote I heard from Madam Beverly Vicente Pigman, who is the chair of the Navajo Nation Human Research Board. We were at a national meeting, and she said to me, we want Navajo experts, not experts on the Navajo. I mean, they want to build this knowledge base internally. They want to be part of that ownership and that stakeholder group and things like that. And with the Navajo, interestingly, it goes a step further as you engage with, at least on a research project from a university level. You know, you think about, we may take vehicles, products, equipment, instruments, and things like that onto the Navajo Nation to do research. Their default is at the end of that project, they have ownership of that. So because they want that stuff to stay with them. They want you to train them on how to use it, and then they want it to stay there when you're done. You know, that's one thing you're going to have to work out with your department and your university if you do research, because you're going to want to have that in the agreement if, oh no, I can't leave this $20,000 or $300,000 instrument with the Navajo when they're done. And they're amenable to that. They understand that. But to the extent that you can build into a budget those products and things that are useful for them to sustain that work and train your partners to sustain that work, that would be desirable. So on the work that we're doing, you know, we've got a couple pilot projects complete. We've gone on and have additional extramural funding through federal funding, so through the National Institutes of Health. And so that's going very successfully. And then lastly, being mindful of time, that stakeholder, that community-based participatory research, those partnership type arrangements with oftentimes left out, under-resourced, under-researched, underprivileged groups. The tribe will lead in identifying and defining those problems and the risks related, and the things that are of greatest importance to them. And we have to be humble and understand those might not be the things that are of greatest importance to us. We're coming from a different ideology and a different paradigm. And the tribe needs to take the lead in developing their own appropriate solutions, and they'll have those strategies, and and help impart education that is accessible, culturally sensitive, uses language that's appropriate for the members of the community and things like that. Possible future work, again, the first couple things are related to things I'm directly involved in. And the third one, the in-home and neighborhood air quality and adverse health outcomes. I mean, one of the projects that we're doing is with Tabitha and colleagues, and we're looking at, again, I heard Miguel talk about weatherization and sort of safety interventions in homes and buildings with regards to lead and energy use in those buildings. Well, all those things work together. A lot of the times those same type of interventions that improves weatherization, improves safety, improves health. It makes, not only are they more resilient from an energy standpoint or energy efficient, oftentimes keeps pollutants that are outdoors from getting indoors, and easier to promote a healthy indoor environment and things like that. And then the last one, again, with colleagues, we're working on community and air quality as it relates to academic performance. But again, there's opportunities there for energy resilience on improvements on those community schools and things like that. So I think just acknowledgements of the great folks that I've worked with, and the thing that I would leave you with in working with tribal populations, you got to be in it for the long haul. You've got to be there on site. It's not easy. You know, for some of the tribes that I'm working with, Southern Utah, Northern Arizona, Wyoming, Nevada, Idaho, they're a long car ride or no direct way to get there in a plane. And that in-person, building that trust in that relationship. I spent many years just going, listening, doing education where I thought it was appropriate and things like that, and built up that trust level. And, we're bearing the fruit, certainly professionally, but I would say it's really fulfilling work, and it's great to see that you can make a difference. So I would encourage you to do that. I think that's all I have.